My son called me at 6:14 on a Tuesday morning, the call that would destroy everything I thought I knew about my own family. I remember the time because I was rinsing out my coffee mug in the kitchen sink, and the digital clock on the microwave was the only light in the room besides the gray dawn coming through the window over the dishwasher. I picked up on the second ring expecting to hear about the grandkids, maybe a question about Thanksgiving plans, something normal. Pop, listen.
I don't have a lot of time. The closing went through last night. The lake house is sold. The new owners are flying in from Dallas this afternoon, so you'll need to be packed and out by 2. Mara already called the storage place in Mineola. They've got a unit waiting for you. Okay? Bye. The line went dead before the soap on my hands had finished sliding down the drain. I stood there with the receiver still pressed against my ear, listening to that flat tone you almost never hear anymore.
The one that sounds like the inside of a seashell if the seashell had given up. Outside the window, a pair of mallards were drifting near the dock the way they did every morning. I'd been feeding them stale bread for 11 years. They didn't know anything was wrong. Why would they? I set the phone down on the counter. I wiped my hands on the dish towel that my late wife had embroidered with a little blue heron the summer before she got sick. And I started to laugh. It wasn't a happy laugh. It was the kind of laugh that comes out when your body doesn't know what else to do with the information your ears just gave it, because what my son didn't know, what his wife didn't know, what the new owners flying in from Dallas didn't know, was that the lake house wasn't his to sell. It never had been. And the paperwork that proved it was sitting in a fireproof box under the floorboards of the very pantry he'd never once bothered to look inside. But I tell you how a 6:14 phone call turned into the worst Tuesday of my son's entire life. I want you to do me a small favor. Hit subscribe if you've ever been treated like furniture by the people you raised. And tell me down in the comments where you're listening from, because I read them and I need to know I'm not the only old man this country forgot. My name is Cyrus Whitlow, I'm 68 years old. Until that Tuesday morning, I lived in a 4-bedroom timber frame house on the east shore of Lake Caddo in Marion County, Texas, where the cypress trees grow out of the water and the Spanish moss hangs down like the curtains in an old movie theater. My wife and I bought the place in 1991, back when nobody wanted lakefront property in East Texas because the base were too small and the mosquitoes were too big. We paid $84,000 for 14 acres and a dock that needed rebuilding. At the time my son called me that morning, comparable properties on our stretch were going for somewhere north of $3 million. I had the coffee, I had the view, I had the dog, a red-bone hound named Biscuit who was half deaf and twice as opinionated as he should have been. What I didn't have anymore was Eleanor. She'd been gone almost 6 years, and in the empty space she left, I'd convinced myself that my son still saw me as a person and not as an obstacle. The decision I'm about to tell you about is the one I think about every single night before I fall asleep. 8 years ago, when Eleanor's cancer came back the second time, our accountant sat me down at his desk in Tyler and told me the smartest thing we could do tax-wise was move the deed of the lake house into a revocable family trust with our son as the named beneficiary. He used phrases like step-up basis and probate avoidance and a lot of other words that sounded responsible. Eleanor was tired and scared and wanted things to be simple for whoever was left behind. So, I signed. What the accountant didn't tell me, because I didn't ask, was that I had options about how to structure that trust. I'm going to come back to that. It matters. My son's name is Brandon. He is 41 years old. He is an executive recruiter in a suburb of Houston called Sugarland, and he is married to a woman named Mara Sue who comes from money she never earned and resents anyone who has money they did. They have 2 children, my grandkids, who I've been allowed to see exactly 9 times in the last 4 years. I counted. You count when it's 9. After I hung up the phone that morning, after I laughed until my ribs hurt, I did 3 things in a particular order. First, I poured the rest of the coffee out of the pot and put it in a thermos. Cold habit. Eleanor used to say, I take a thermos to my own funeral. Second, I walked into the pantry, moved the wire rack with the canned tomatoes, lifted up the loose floorboard that I cut myself in the spring of 1994, and pulled out a faded green Cabela's lockbox. Inside that lockbox was a manila folder, and inside that folder was a document my son had never read, never asked about, and never even knew existed. Third, I called a man named Easton Pruitt. Easton is 71 years old, semi-retired, drinks bourbon at 10 in the morning, and is the meanest property attorney east of Dallas. He used to be my brother-in-law before my sister left him in 1998, but we stayed friends because some men understand each other better than they understand their own families. He picked up on the 4th ring, sounding like he'd been gargling gravel. Cyrus, it's either you're dying or you finally caught a fish big enough to mount. Easton, I said, do you remember the trust we set up for the lake place in 2017? There was a pause. The kind of pause where you can hear a man's brain shifting gears. I remember every line of it, he said. I wrote it. Branton sold it. The silence on the other end was so long I thought the call had dropped. Then I heard him exhale. Slow, the way a man exhales when he's just been handed a very particular kind of gift. Cyrus, he said, Does that boy have any idea what a Scheduled B revocation clause looks like? I don't believe he does. Get dressed. Put on a real shirt, not one of those fishing things. I'll be at your front door in 2 hours. And we are going to ruin somebody's afternoon. I want to tell you about the next 8 hours. Because the next 8 hours are when I stopped being a grieving widower in a flannel shirt and started being something my son had forgotten ever lived inside me. Before I retired and moved out to the lake, I spent 26 years working commercial title insurance in Houston. That doesn't sound like much. People hear title insurance and they think of a man in a beige cubicle pushing paper. But what I really did for 26 years was find the cracks. Every piece of land in Texas has a chain of ownership going back to the Republic. And somewhere in that chain, on about one deal in 50, there is a crack. A missing signature. A forgotten widow. A mineral rights carve-out that nobody noticed in 1962. My job was to find those cracks before my company insured the deal, because if I missed one, we paid out millions. I was good at my job. I was very good at my job. I retired with a corner office and a reputation and the kind of pension that lets a man buy 14 acres on a lake and stop returning calls. When I set up that trust in 2017, I asked the accountant to give me the cleanest version and I signed where he pointed. But then I took the documents home. I read them at the kitchen table with a yellow legal pad and a glass of bourbon. And I added one thing. With Easton's help 2 weeks later in an amendment that the accountant never saw and that Branton never knew about. The amendment said that the beneficiary, my son, did not have unilateral authority to convey, sell, encumber or otherwise transfer the property without the express written consent of the trust grantor, who was me, while the grantor was alive and of sound mind. It also said that any attempted conveyance without that consent would be void from inception and would trigger an immediate revocation of the beneficiary's interest, which would revert in full to the grantor. In plain English, he couldn't sell it without my signature, and the moment he tried, his name came off the deed entirely. He didn't know about the amendment because Eleanor and I never told him. We planned to tell him eventually. Then Eleanor got sick again. Then she died, and after she died, Branton stopped calling and I stopped feeling like I owed him an explanation about anything. By 8:30 that morning, Easton was sitting at my kitchen table in a navy suit that didn't quite fit anymore, drinking coffee and reading the closing documents that Branton had emailed me the night before, presumably as an afterthought. Presumably so that I'd have a record for my files. That's the word he used in the email. Files. Like I was a department. Cyrus, Easton said without looking up, do you know what your son sold this house for? I don't. 2.1 million. Cash. To a couple named the Hinshaws out of Dallas. They wired the funds yesterday at 4:11 in the afternoon. Branton's portion after the realtor and the title company comes to about 1.9. I thought about that number. I thought about it for a long time. 2.1 million was about 70% of what the property was actually worth, and I knew without being told that he had taken a low cash offer because he needed it to clear fast. Whatever he was running from was running faster. Pull his finances, I said. Already on it, I called Rennie on the way over. He'll have something by lunch. Rennie is a man Easton has used for about 30 years. I don't know exactly what Rennie does, and I have made a point of not asking, but he is the kind of man who can tell you by 2 in the afternoon what your son ate for breakfast on a Thursday in March. While we waited, I did something I hadn't done in a very long time. I went into the bedroom Eleanor and I had shared, and I opened her closet, which I had not been able to bring myself to empty. Her dresses were still hanging there, organized by color the way she liked them. I took down a small wooden jewelry box from the top shelf. Inside was her wedding ring. I'd never been able to decide what to do with it. I closed my fingers around it. And I made a promise to her. Out loud in a voice that didn't shake. I'm not going to let him take this from us, Ellie. Not the house. Not the dock. Not the dogwood you planted by the boathouse. Not 1 square inch of what we built. He's going to learn what it cost to forget who his mother was. I put the ring in my pocket. I went back to the kitchen. Rennie called at 12:40. Easton put him on speakerphone. I sat at the table with a yellow legal pad in front of me, the same kind I'd used my whole working life, and I started taking notes. What Rennie had found in 6 hours was the kind of thing it takes most investigators a week to assemble. My son was not a successful executive recruiter. He had not closed a meaningful placement in 14 months. The Sugar Land office he listed on his website was a mail drop. He was $380,000 behind on a second mortgage on his house. He owed the IRS $112,000 in back taxes from a business loss he had failed to disclose. His wife, Mara Sue, had run up just under $200,000 on credit cards, mostly at a stable in Katy, where she was attempting to become a competitive equestrian at the age of 39. Their oldest child, my grandson Holden, who was 12, had been pulled out of his private school in October because the tuition had not been paid. They had told the school it was for a family wellness sabbatical. It was not. And the worst part, the part that when Rennie said it made me close my eyes and put my hand flat on the table to steady myself, Branton had been telling Mara's family for the better part of a year that I had dementia. That I was confused, that I had given him verbal permission to handle the property for my own good. He had told her father, a retired oil and gas executive in Midland, that I had asked him to find me a memory care facility. And that the proceeds of the lake house sale would fund my placement. He was selling my home, my wife's last garden, my dog's only yard, to pay his gambling debts and his wife's horse habit. And he was telling people I was too crazy to know what year it was. Easton was watching me from across the table. "Cyrus," he said, "you want to call him?" "No," I said. "You want to call the Henshaws?" "No." "What do you want to do?" I looked out the back window at the dock. A great blue heron had landed on the railing. The way one did almost every afternoon in October. It tilted its head at me through the glass. "I want to let it close," I said. "I want him to go home tonight thinking he won. I want him to wire that money to whoever he's paying. I want him to sleep in his own bed believing he just solved his life. And then tomorrow morning at 8 a.m., I want you to file the revocation, void the sale, freeze his accounts, and notify the Henshaws that their $2.1 million just bought them a stack of paper." Easton smiled. It was not a kind smile. It was the smile of a man remembering why he used to love his job. "That's elegant, Cyrus. I learned from elegant people. What about the boy?" "Branton's not a boy, he's 41. And what he did to Eleanor's memory is something I am not prepared to forgive." I meant the grandson, Holden. I sat with that for a minute. Because Easton was right to ask. Holden had not done any of this. Holden was 12 years old and had been pulled out of his school and probably told some story about why. Holden didn't deserve what was about to fall on his father. "I'll handle Holden separately," I said. "When the dust settles, he has a grandfather as long as I'm alive. And he doesn't have to inherit his father's choices. But that's a conversation for a Sunday a few months from now. Today is a different kind of day." Easton nodded. He understood the difference between justice and cruelty, which a lot of lawyers don't. We worked through the afternoon. Easton drafted the revocation. He drafted the notice to the Henshaws. He drafted the cease and desist to the title company in Dallas that had handled the closing, who, I should mention, had not done a proper search of the trust documents because they had relied on a summary affidavit that Branton had signed under penalty of perjury, swearing he had full authority to convey. That affidavit was a felony, and I made sure Easton flagged it, not because I wanted my son arrested, but because I wanted him to understand, when the moment came, that the door had been open the whole time, and I had chosen not to walk through it. Brent called me at 4:20 that afternoon. I let it go to voicemail. He called again at 4:35. I let it go again. At 5:10 he sent a text. "Pop, just checking you got everything packed. The Henshaws are at the gate. I told them the housekeeper let them in. Don't make this weird." I read the text twice. I put the phone down. I poured a glass of bourbon. And I waited. At 6:02 the doorbell rang. I'd been expecting a couple in their 40s the way Rennie had described them. What I got was a husband and wife in their early 60s, both of them quiet, both of them looking deeply uncomfortable. The way decent people look when they realize the deal they just signed has a smell to it. The husband was a tall man with white hair and the kind of suit you buy in Dallas when you've made your money, but you don't want to look like it. The wife was holding a small bouquet of grocery store flowers, the way people do when they're moving into a place and they want to make a gesture. "Mr. Whitlow," the husband said. "That's me, I'm Holcomb Henshaw. This is my wife, Marlene. We were told you'd be gone." "I'd imagine you were." He looked at me. Marlene looked at me. Biscuit came up behind me and leaned against my leg, the way he does with strangers he doesn't trust. "Sir," Holcomb said slowly, "is there a problem with the closing?" I opened the door wider. "Mr. Henshaw, would you and your wife like to come in? I'm going to pour you a drink, I'm going to show you a document, and then I'm going to call my lawyer, who is going to call your lawyer, and we are all going to have a very long evening. But I want you to know, before any of that starts, that I do not believe you are bad people. I believe you have been lied to by my son. And I'm about to spend several hours making sure you get every penny of your money back." Marlene put her hand over her mouth. Holcomb closed his eyes for a second. Then he opened them and said, in a voice that was steadier than I would have managed, "Mr. Whitlow, may we come in?" They came in. I poured 3 glasses of bourbon. I sat them down at the kitchen table where, 8 years earlier, I had read a trust document and added an amendment that nobody knew about, and I told them everything. I told them everything. I told them about Eleanor. I told them about the trust. I told them about the amendment. I told them what Branton had been telling people about my mind. I told them what Rennie had found about the gambling and the horse and the school tuition, and I told them, when I was done, that the deed they'd received that morning was, as of the moment Branton signed the affidavit swearing he had authority to sell, legally void. Holcomb Henshaw did not get angry. That's the part I'll always remember. A lesser man, a man who had been lied to out of $2.1 million, would have stood up and put his fist through my pantry door. Holcomb just sat there. He took a slow sip of his bourbon, he looked at his wife. And then he said something I have repeated to myself many times since. Mr. Whitlow, my own father died last year. My brother spent the last 3 months of his life trying to talk him into changing his will. I would like to help you with whatever you are about to do. And then, when this is over, I would like to come back here and meet your dog properly. I shook his hand. Marlene cried a little into a paper napkin from the holder Eleanor had bought at a flea market in Jefferson in 2003. The Henshaws left at 8:30 that night. Easton came back at 9. We worked until almost 2 in the morning. By the time I went to bed, the revocation was ready to file, the title company had been put on notice, the Henshaws' attorney had been looped in and was already drafting a fraud claim against my son to recover their funds, and the Texas Department of Insurance had received a preliminary complaint about the affidavit. I slept 4 hours. I woke up at 6. I made coffee, I sat on the dock with Biscuit and watched the sun come up over the cypress trees, the way Eleanor and I used to. At 8 a.m., Easton hit send on the filings. At 8:47, my son called me. I picked up. "Pop," he said. And his voice was different now, smaller. "Pop, what did you do?" "I didn't do anything, Brenton." "You did. The bank just froze the wire. They're saying the deed is void. They're saying I committed perjury." "Pop, I'm going to lose everything." "Yes. Pop, please, you have to fix this. Mara doesn't know any of it. The kids, Holden, he's already lost his school." "Pop? Please call your guy. You have to call your guy and tell him to undo this. I'm begging you. I am begging you. I am begging you on my life." I sat on the dock. The heron was back. Biscuit was watching a turtle on the log. "Branson," I said, "I need you to listen to me because I'm only going to say this once." He went quiet. "You called me at 6 in the morning yesterday and told me to be out of my house by 2 in the afternoon. You did not ask. You did not explain. You did not even bother to lie to me to my face. You sent a text message about a housekeeper. You told your wife's family I had dementia. You sold the house your mother died in to pay for a horse and a card game. And when I picked up the phone just now, you didn't ask if I was all right. You didn't ask if I was all right. You didn't ask if I had a place to sleep last night. You asked me to fix it." He started crying. I had not heard him cry since he was 17 years old. "I'm going to tell you what is going to happen," I said. "The Henshaws are going to get their money back, every penny. And they are going to receive a formal apology from this family, written by you, by hand, on paper, before the end of the week. The title company is going to refer your affidavit to the district attorney. And what happens there is between you and the law, and I will not interfere in either direction. Your name has been removed from the trust as of 1 minute past midnight. The lake house is mine, in my name, and it will go where I decide it goes when I'm gone, which is not your decision to make. And as for your debts are yours. I am not your bank, I am not your safety net. I am your father, and I have been your father this whole time. And the part of being a father that you mistook for weakness is the part I am putting away today." "Pop," he said. "I am not finished. There is one more thing. Your son, Holden, my grandson. I know what you pulled him out of school for, and I know he doesn't know the real reason. When this is over, when the dust has settled, and you have figured out whatever life you are going to have on the other side of this, I want a phone call from him. Not from you. From him. He is going to have a grandfather in his life, because he has not earned what is happening to his father, and I will not punish a 12-year-old boy for the sins of a 41-year-old man. But you will not be on that call. You will not be on that call. You will not be in those visits. You will not be in his summers at the lake, until you have done the work to become a man I can stand to be in a room with. You will not be in this house. Do you understand me?" He was crying so hard I almost couldn't make out the word. "Yes. Then we are done for today." I hung up the phone. I sat on the dock until the coffee in my mug went cold. Biscuit put his head on my foot. "I want to tell you what happened in the months after, because the comments people leave on stories like this always ask, and I read every one of them." The Henshaws got their money back, all $2.1 million, within 9 days. Holcomb and Marlene came back to the house in November, the way he said they would, and he met Biscuit properly, and we ate brisket on the dock, and watched the herons, and they told me they had decided not to buy in Texas after all. What they really wanted was a place in the Carolinas. They send a Christmas card now. I keep it on the mantle. Branton's affidavit was referred to the district attorney's office. He was charged with 1 count of theft by deception and 2 counts of forgery related to the perjured statement. He pled to a reduced charge, served 4 months in a county facility, and is currently on probation. He works at a tire shop in Rosenberg. Mara Sue divorced him in March. The horse was sold at auction to cover part of her debt. The house in Sugar Land went into foreclosure. I did not pay his legal fees. I did not visit him in jail. I sent him a letter, one letter that said, "I love you and I do not trust you, And those two things are allowed to live in a man's chest at the same time, and that is the last thing I have to teach you. Holden called me on a Saturday in February. He is 13 now. We talked for 40 minutes about a video game I do not understand. He is coming to spend 2 weeks at the lake this summer with his sister, and his mother has agreed because she trusts me, even now, maybe even more now. I am building them a tree house in the live oak by the boathouse. Eleanor would have loved that. I put her wedding ring on a chain. I wear it under my shirt. I take it off only when I'm in the water. Here is the only thing I want you to take from this story. If you take anything at all, loving someone does not require you to disappear for them. The people who tell you that family means swallowing every cruelty without complaint are almost always the people doing the cruelty. You can love your child, you can love them with your whole life, and you can still, on a Tuesday morning at 6:14, when they tell you to be out of your house by 2, decide that the most loving thing you will ever do for them is hand them the consequences of their own decisions with both hands and not flinch. I am 68 years old. I live, unlike Cato, in a 4-bedroom timber frame house on 14 acres of cypress and Spanish moss. I have a dog named Biscuit and a heron who comes to my dock every afternoon. And a grandson who is going to have a treehouse by July. If you have ever been told you were furniture by the people you raised, hit the like button. Tell me down in the comments where you're listening from. And remember that the quietest men in the room are usually the ones who read the fine print. I'll see you on the next one. I've thought a lot in the months since that Tuesday morning about what actually happened in my kitchen at 6:14. On the surface, my son made a phone call. Underneath, something much older was finishing its work. Brenton did not wake up that morning and decide to become the kind of man who sells his mother's house to pay for a card game. He arrived at that morning. He arrived at it the way a river arrives at a cliff after 1,000 small turns nobody bothered to mark on a map. Every unpaid debt he hid from his wife. Every lie he told her father about my mind. Every tuition bill he let go past due while telling Holden it was a sabbatical. Each one of those was a small choice, and each small choice quietly built the man who picked up the phone that morning and spoke to me like I was a department in a building he was leasing. I am not a man who believes in fate. I worked title insurance for 26 years. I believe in cause and effect the way a carpenter believes in gravity. You drop a hammer, the hammer falls. You lie to the people who raised you, and one morning you discover that the ground you were standing on belonged to somebody else the entire time. The hard part of this story, the part I do not say lightly, is that the same law applied to me. I had to look at the years I spent disappearing into Eleanor's grief and ask myself how many of Branton's small choices had gone unanswered because I was too tired or too sad or too kind to name them out loud. A boy does not become 41 and cruel by accident. Somewhere along the way, somebody who loved him should have told him no and meant it and held the line even when his face crumpled. I did not always do that. I am not innocent in the shape of the man my son became. That is a thing I have to carry, and I carry it. But carrying a thing is different from being crushed by it. There is a kind of strength that has nothing to do with muscles and everything to do with refusing to flinch when the moment finally comes. The amendment Easton and I added to that trust in 2017 was not revenge. It was a quiet act of foresight by a man who had written enough contracts to know that love without structure is just a wish. I did not set the trap. I built a fence. Branton walked up to it and put both hands on it and pushed. If you take anything from a tired man on a dock at Lake Cato, take this. Be honest enough to read the fine print on your own life. Be wise enough to know that helping someone is not the same as paying for them. And be strong enough when the moment arrives to love your child by handing them their consequences and not the keys to your house. That is not coldness. That is the most expensive form of decency a parent can buy. And by the time the heron lands on your dock at the end of it, you will know it was worth every quiet dollar. Thanks for watching, and remember, the craziest stories are still ahead. Subscribe so you don't miss the next one.